Chapter 6. When Josh dropped Marti off that evening, she remembered the Cabbage Patch Kids that hadn't made it in from the back seat of her old Toyota Corolla yet. "Wanna help me carry in the gifts I bought for the babies?" "Sure. You know they won't care about the gifts yet, right? They're pretty much into sucking, pooping, and peeing. I haven't seen them do anything else." "Oh, wait, they sleep and puke, too." "Oh, hush. These dolls will be their best friends." She pulled two of the dolls out of the back seat of her car and handed them to Josh. "Wait while I get the other two." Josh stood and looked at the dolls in their cardboard boxes. "These things are creepy." "That's what all my sisters say. I have 15 of them. I love me some Cabbage Patch Kids." She got the other two from the back seat and carried them into the house. When they got to the living room, she found her mother, his mother, Heather, and Michael with the babies. "I brought in their presents." Heather looked up at Marti and groaned. "Cabbage Patch Kids? I hate those things. Please tell me you're not really leaving them. When I asked you what I could bring for them, you said no toys that make noise." "They don't make noise. I'm going to open them and fill out the birth certificates right now." Josh stared at Marti like she'd grown an extra head. "Birth certificates?" "Yes, each Cabbage Patch Kid is unique and comes with his or her own birth certificate, making them special." She smiled like she'd done something wonderful, and for just a moment, he thought about running. As she was filling them out, Marti received another of her visions, but this one wasn't as welcome as the last. She saw herself filling out 3 birth certificates for Cabbage Patch Kids, while 3 babies slept in bassinets around her. Josh stood over her watching. All at once, she knew that if she married Josh, she would have triplets, and she had no desire to have that many babies at once. One at a time should be enough for anyone. She looked at him, and she knew she had to end their relationship immediately. He knew her secret, sure, but she couldn't let that matter. Her destiny had to be in Texas, where she belonged, not in Idaho, with a man who would impregnate her with triplets. Had she lost her mind? When she'd finished filling out the birth certificates, she carefully took the dolls upstairs and put them in the nursery. She put them up on shelves, and Josh stood watching her. "You really like these things, don't you?" Marti nodded. "I do." She took a deep breath. "And I really like you, but I don't think I can keep seeing you. I'm just not ready for as quickly as this relationship is moving." "We'll slow it down," Josh said, his brow furrowed. He took her shoulders in his hands. "If you want, we'll just hang out together. I won't try to kiss you anymore." It wasn't his kisses Marti was worried about, but she slowly nodded. She couldn't cut him out completely. He was Michael's brother. "I think that'll work." "Can I take you snowmobiling next Saturday?" he asked, still a little worried about what was going on in her head. She'd seemed very content with him earlier, and all of a sudden, she didn't want him around. It just didn't make sense. Yeah, I think that's all right." She really did want to go snowmobiling, and as long as they were going just as friends, it should be fine. As friends, though, right? He nodded, looking a bit hurt, but she couldn't tell him what she'd seen. He'd laugh at her. Or worse, he'd convince her it was all right, and they wouldn't really have triplets. No, she couldn't tell him. "All right. Thanks for a wonderful day," she said softly. "I had a really good time, and Daisy is fabulous." "How is she on a snowmobile?" He knew she was trying to make him laugh, to soften the blow, so he obliged. "She likes to run alongside a snowmobile. Maybe I'll bring her. We'll ride around my ranch. Maybe you can make me those Irish nachos. I'll get the ingredients. I'll meet you at your house around 2 on Saturday. Does that work?" "Sure." He felt strangely let down. He'd known her for less than a week, but already he had fallen for her, and she didn't want to be around him. He had to be able to salvage it somehow. I'm going to head home. I'll see you then. Sounds good. Marti kept a smile on her face and tried to stay chipper. He had to think she was all right with the decision, even though she wasn't. Not at all. She waited a minute or two for him to get out of the house, picking up the blankets in the baby's room and folding them nicely. When she went back down the stairs to join the others, she plastered a smile on her face. No one needed to know she'd just broken her own heart. Asterisk. Marti started to do better with her routine, staying up until it was light out and sleeping late. It worked well because her mother was a morning person, and there were always two people with the babies. She did laundry while the babies were asleep at night, and she spent a lot of time curled up with books reading. She had to read or she'd lose her mind. Her choice of books was always romance, romantic books that seemed like the couple was impossible, but they always worked out in the end. She and Josh didn't even seem impossible, but she knew they would never work out. More and more her visions focused on him. She saw his house, decorated how she liked it, and babies. Always with the babies. Each vision was more and more real, and she'd close her eyes, trying to ignore them. She was pacing with one of the babies on Friday night after her mother had gone to bed, and another vision hit her. She had to stop walking because suddenly she was blind to the world around her. In that vision, she saw Josh pushing a little girl on a swing, two little dark-headed boys playing at his feet. He looked so happy, and she knew she was depriving him and herself of that happiness. But when she opened her eyes, she saw her sister with circles under her eyes, exhausted from the demands of taking care of 4 babies. She couldn't do that to him or herself. Heather watched her sister and frowned. "What did you see?" "Something that will never come true," Marti said. She wouldn't talk about it. Not even to Heather. She put the baby she was holding into a swing and picked up another, who was crying harder. She took one of the bottles she'd already warmed and stuck it in the baby's mouth. "What do you think of your Cabbage Patch Kid?" Heather knew to drop the subject, but she'd been sensing something was wrong with Marti all week. She'd wait till the babies were down, and then they'd have a sister-to-sister chat. It was obviously the only thing that would work to fix Marti and whatever she'd done to mess up her life. Once the babies were asleep, Marti got another load of laundry from the dryer to fold. When she got back to the living room, she expected Heather to have gone to bed, but instead her sister was sitting in her chair waiting for her. She got up and walked to the couch where Marti was folding tiny baby clothes, and she picked up a onesie to fold it herself. "What's going on, Marti?" "Michael said that you and Josh had decided to be just friends, and I keep seeing you have visions you're not willing to talk about. Tell me what's happening." Big sisters have shoulders to lean on. Marti shook her head, a tear slipping out of her eye. "I'm just being silly." "Don't worry about it. You're not being silly. Did something happen that makes you think you shouldn't marry Josh? A vision maybe?" Before Marti knew what she was doing, it all came pouring out. "I cannot imagine having more than one baby at once. I watch how tired you are and everything you've gone through. I don't want to have triplets." Heather frowned. "And this is all because you don't want triplets? Really?" "Well, a small part of me keeps saying I'm not ready for a committed relationship, but mostly it's about the babies. I keep seeing visions of Josh with them, or me with them, or both of us with them. It's like my visions are trying to convince me that it's what I want, when I know it's what I don't want. So if you didn't have your visions, would you still be dating Josh?" "Definitely. I don't think I'd have called it off over feeling that I wasn't ready for a relationship yet. I could have gotten past that. It's all about the babies." Marti folded another little onesie and added it to the stack. "I know it seems crazy, but I couldn't do what you do." Heather sighed, shaking her head. "Of course you could. If that's what God wanted you to do, you'd be right there doing it. Marti frowned. If I wasn't shown the vision so I could make an educated choice, then why was I shown? It doesn't make sense, Heather. I know I'm not meant to be a mother of multiples. It's not for me. I think you're wrong. I think you're very wrong. I never thought you'd be good with kids at all, and look at you with the quads. You're a natural. This may seem strange, but you've always been very analytical. Sit down and make yourself a chart. Give yourself all the reasons he's right for you and all the reasons he's wrong for you. Then look at the list. See if you're making a mistake. It won't matter. I already dumped him. But you're going to see him as a friend, right? Marti nodded. Yeah, we have plans to go snowmobiling later. I want to say tomorrow, but it's 3 in the morning. Today, I guess. My days are getting all messed up in my head. Mine too. I think it's part of the ridiculous hours we're keeping. Speaking of which, I'm going to go get into bed and snuggle with my husband for as long as I can. Think about what I said, though. I think you're going to regret letting the love of your life go, just because you don't want triplets. With those words, Heather headed for the stairs and her bed. As Marti watched her go, she couldn't help but wonder if her sister was right. But if she was wrong, was it too late for her and Josh? Had he completely given up on her? Asterisk. Josh lay awake most of Friday night, wondering if he was making a mistake. Why torture himself by spending time with Marti when she obviously didn't want to be around him? She'd made it clear they had no future together, but he couldn't look at her without seeing forever in her eyes. It was just after 5 when he got up and let Daisy outside, going into the kitchen to brew a strong pot of coffee. He didn't normally drink the stuff, but on days when he'd had no sleep, he really didn't have a choice. He went to the garage and made sure there was enough fuel in each of the snowmobiles, and then he thought about the path they would take. Thought about what he'd say to her. How he'd convince her that they belonged together. With her visions, she should know that. Whatever. He'd be the best friend to her that he could possibly be. What else was available to him? He could not be around her or be her friend. And a life without Marti in it seemed like a waste of breath to him. He spent the morning doing his chores around the ranch, things he would normally have put off until Monday, but he had to keep busy. He had to keep his mind off the woman he couldn't stop thinking about. Lying awake all night and staring at the ceiling certainly didn't work. An hour before she was due to arrive, he made hot chocolate and poured it into 2 thermoses. He wanted them each to have something warm to drink while they were out. He knew she wasn't used to cold temperatures at all, so he'd have to think of new ways to keep her warm. Ways that didn't include holding her close and kissing her as he wanted to do. When she finally arrived, he recognized her cold weather gear as Heather's, but he acted as casually as he could. You ready for a day in the snow? Marti nodded hesitantly. I've never even made a snowman, and you want me driving a snowmobile? I hope you're aware that you're going to have to teach me what to do. Absolutely. He spent the next 10 minutes showing her how to control the machine and giving her advice on what to do if they hit a snowdrift. I have emergency blankets and matches if for some reason we get stuck. I'm really prepared for any eventuality. That's good. I wouldn't want to freeze to death because you wanted to play in the snow. He gave her a bag that included her thermos and some snacks. We won't be out for too terribly long this first time. First time? We're doing this again? She asked, surprised he was willing to spend time with her after the way she'd treated him. I can't let you be bored in Idaho, can I? My brother would lose his nanny. He got onto his machine and started it, leading the way. He'd made a little bit of a path through the snow, so he knew which way would be best for them to go. Marti followed, watching his strong back and thinking about what a good man he was. He hadn't even stopped wanting to spend time with her after she'd let him know there was no future between them. He had to know how lonely she would get with just family for company. She needed friends in Idaho, and he was going to be her best friend. She sighed. Maybe Heather was right and she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Maybe she should stop him and kiss him, letting him know that she was ready for a real relationship. But every time she thought about the triplets, she knew she couldn't handle it. No, things would have to go on as they were. Chapter 7. As Marti followed Josh through the snow-covered fields of his ranch, she realized that she enjoyed this more than she'd thought she possibly could. The beautiful valley was covered with snow, and she couldn't believe how much prettier it was covered in the stark white. After a little while, Josh sped up the pace, and she was comfortable enough with the vehicle to speed up after him. It was fun, and it was a break she sorely needed after a week cooped up inside the house with nothing but laundry and babies to think about. Here she was able to just let her mind wander where it would as she floated over the snow. It felt like flying. He finally stopped in front of a fence and turned to her. The joy on his face from their flight across the country was palpable. "What do you think? Can we do this every day?" Marti asked, her face lit with excitement. "I had no idea what I was getting into, but this is fun. There's hot chocolate in your bag. You should drink a little. You're not used to this type of cold." Marti nodded, reaching for the bag and pulling her thermos out, noting he did the same with his. "It is cold, but it's so worth it. I'm glad you're enjoying this. It's one of my favorite things to do. Anytime my brain gets jumbled, I come out here and just ride." "Anytime? You can't use a snowmobile in the summer, can you?" "I have a quad runner for when there's no snow. And I spend a lot of time on horseback, both for work and for fun. I've almost got a stallion trained to the saddle. Been working with him for a couple of years." "Wait, didn't you break a bone while trying to train him a year ago?" It seems like that's why Michael had to cut his trip to Texas short. Josh grinned at her knowing that about him. "Yup. Michael wasn't thrilled with me, and he came back talking about Heather. Every other word out of his mouth was her name or something about her. Man, he was annoying." Marti laughed. "I was in school at the time, but I remember trips home, and all the talk was about Michael. I was so glad when they finally got married and I didn't have to listen to it anymore. I'm glad you understand." He took another drink of his hot chocolate and screwed the lid on his thermos. "You ready to head back?" Marti sighed. "I wish we could go on forever, but I can't feel my toes anymore. Heather's feet are a half size smaller than mine, and these boots are killing me. You need to get your own if we're going to have winter adventures. Are you planning more?" "I was thinking about taking you skiing tomorrow, or maybe sledding." "You have a preference?" "I'd much rather sled, thank you very much. Sledding sounds safer and more fun. When you're not as high off the ground, there's less chance you'll die." He laughed. "I like both, but I can agree with sledding. There's a great hill not too far from here. Can your feet handle those boots for a little longer? Or should I call my sisters and see if either of them have some you could borrow? Or we could drive to Walmart today, but the nearest is an hour and a half drive." She frowned. "I would really like to get my own snow gear. Would you mind the drive? We could take my car. Or I could even go alone." "No, I'll drive you. We'll do better with four-wheel drive. It might start snowing again later, and I would hate to see you out in it with no real experience driving in snow." "I assume you have no experience driving in snow." "I guess I don't know that about you. Where did you go to college?" "Oh, I went to UT in Austin." "No experience driving in snow." "In Texas, the whole world shuts down if there's a flurry spotted in the sky." "Well, that doesn't sound very productive, but I guess I can't say anything. I think the whole world would shut down here for temperatures over 100. I would die." She grinned. We just had a ton of flooding in our little town. It was weird because usually we're under burn bans by the fall because it's so dry. She didn't explain how she and her sister had helped save their entire town when a dam burst. It made them sound like they'd done something superhuman, and really, they'd just used their powers for good. That sounds strange. Everything turned out all right? Marti shrugged. As right as it possibly could have given the circumstances. Are we going back to the house the way we came? He nodded. Why? Race you. Marti didn't wait for a response and headed for the trail they'd forged coming out this way. She knew she needed a head start if there was any chance at all she could beat him back. He laughed and started after her, shaking his head at her antics. There was no woman on this earth more perfect for him, and he was sad she'd decided not to let their relationship go anywhere. He'd convince her otherwise, though. He had to. He let her beat him back to the house, knowing it would thrill her. You cheated, though. She shrugged. I gave myself a head start because you're so much more experienced on a snowmobile than I am. That would sound fair if you'd asked for a head start. But you didn't. He opened the door and led her inside. We should eat in town while we're there. Sounds good to me. I had soup for lunch. Soup's good on a cold day. He grabbed his keys from a hook where they were hanging. Let's go. We'll eat supper and get you some boots and a coat. You definitely need your own coat. And gloves, and she thought about how much money she had in her checking account, and she hoped it would be enough. She'd gotten her first paycheck from Michael and Heather, but she hadn't had a chance to deposit it yet. Come on, you. He grabbed her hand and tugged her toward his truck, not thinking about the simple gesture. Once they were in, he turned the heat on high. It'll warm up in a few minutes. As they drove, they listened to music, discovering they liked a lot of the same songs. I don't like the hard rock stuff, Marti told him, but I love most of the pop. And country. Country is good. They sang along with songs, and the time flew by. When they reached the big city, where the Walmart was, they headed into the store. We only have a small feed store in town. You could get a coat, but it wouldn't be a cute one, and I can tell you like cute coats. Well, yeah. Why wear something if you can't make a fashion statement with it? She found everything she was looking for, and a pair of cute leg warmers as well, and headed to the checkout. She'd added everything in her head a dozen times, and she should be under her budget. After she'd paid, they went back to the truck. Let's get food. What are you hungry for? Italian? Mexican? Something else? I'd love some Mexican, but I'm not risking my taste buds on Idaho Mexican food. And I totally forgot I was supposed to make you nachos today. I'll do that after we sled tomorrow. Does that work? He nodded. But I'm not worried about eating tomorrow. I need to think about eating today. Fine. How about Chinese? She had no idea if there was Chinese somewhere in town, but usually there was. Chinese it is. There's a good little buffet not far from here. When they got to the restaurant, he immediately paid for both of them, and she thanked him. I'll pay you back. No, you won't. You're with me, and even if it's not an official date, I'm buying. That's how it works. She made a face at him, but at the moment she couldn't complain too much. She didn't have the funds to make a big fuss. They got their plates fixed, and she dug into the food. Hey, this isn't bad. He rolled his eyes. Why did you think it would be bad? Well, you guys can't do Mexican, so I didn't think you'd be able to do Chinese either. It's a cuisine thing. Hush and eat your food. She grinned, realizing she'd told him to hush before she'd said any other words to him. I'll think about it. You're a pain, McClain. Anyone ever call you McClain the Pain? She chewed up her bite of food before responding. Only once. He laughed. She couldn't be taller than 5'2", and he was 6 feet. And she was acting like she was threatening him. It was downright amusing. So you're making me those special nachos tomorrow, right? Yeah. My sister Tracy made them up. They're not really a traditional Irish thing, but she loved Irish food and Mexican food so much, she had to combine them. One day, I'll lure you back to Bagley, and you can eat at her pub. The food is amazing. I don't think it would take a lot of effort to lure me, he said with a grin. Then we'll do it. Soon. She wanted to take him to Bagley and show him around town. Take him to the boys' ranch that had been in her family for generations. Maybe take him to the Riverwalk in San Antonio, and they could wander up and down the walk and ride in the boat. There were so many special things she wanted to do with him. I've only been to Texas once, and that was for Michael and Heather's wedding. I don't remember there being an Irish pub in town. My sister just opened it last month. It's been her dream since she spent a year backpacking through Ireland and England. She's talked about little else for years, and her dream is finally a reality. Is she married? Marti nodded. All my sisters are either married or engaged. Last woman standing. She raised her arms in victory. He laughed. Are you sure you want to be the last woman standing? I could lure you into my life with snowmobile rides and sledding. You could, but you respect me too much for that. At least for now. We're going slow, remember? Oh, yeah. I'm not so good at slow. She shrugged. I'm not sure I am either. But we need to be friends. As she said it, another vision hit her, one of the two of them as an older couple, at least in their 70s, surrounded by grandchildren. He was holding her hand. Are you sure you have no regrets? He asked her. I married my best friend. Who could have regrets, was her response. She blinked a couple of times and frowned. Her future self, married to him, had no regrets. Not even about triplets? That was hard to believe. He waved a hand in front of her face. Earth to Marti. Are you still in there? Just daydreaming, she responded. She thought about telling him about the visions, but she just couldn't. Maybe someday, but not now. They finished their meal in silence, and he led her to the truck. What's going on in your head? I thought we were all good now. He couldn't figure out why she went silent on him so often. Nothing. Just thinking. Some of us do that from time to time. I think. Sure you do. Marti settled into the seat and grinned over at him. Have you thought about having steps installed on this truck? It's a mighty big step up for those of us who are vertically challenged. Have you thought about growing an inch or two? Are you saying there's something wrong with my height? Josh shook his head adamantly. I would never say that. You're just pocket-sized. Mind if I put you in my pocket and carry you around? Yes, I do. She folded her arms over her chest. I'm taller than some people. Like who? Like Heather. She's the shortest of all 7 of us. So you're taller than a very short woman. Congrats. She made a face at him before turning to look out the window on her side of the truck. Do you come into town often? About once a month for supplies I can't get in town. I usually plan it in advance and ask Mom and my siblings if they need anything. Usually each of us comes into town once a month, so there's one of us coming in weekly. Makes it so even if we forget something, someone is here to get it. Makes sense. Bagley wasn't a big town, but it seemed to have most of what you need. And how far is Austin? About 30 minutes. I hope Austin never grows so much that we become a suburb. I like having a quiet little town. It suits me. I can see that. Did you like going to school in Austin? She shrugged. Austin is the party capital of Texas. Don't tell any of my sisters, but I kind of wish I'd followed family tradition and gone to A&M. Austin was a little too wild for my tastes. I ended up spending a lot of time alone in my dorm room because I didn't do the party scene. That makes sense. How about roommates? After my first semester, roommate overdosed on some drugs and spent the rest of the semester in the hospital. I decided it was time for me to live alone. I got a single room every semester after that. Wow. Yeah, I'd have probably done the same thing. Did you go to college? I did. I went to Utah State University in Logan, Utah. Good school, and it taught me a lot. I graduated from there. And? Do you use your degree? I had in my head that because I graduated with a 4.0, companies would roll out the red carpet for me. She shook her head. I've been job hunting for months and only had a few interviews. Didn't your powers tell you that you wouldn't get a job immediately? She sighed. I wish people understood better how my powers work. They only tell me what they want me to know. So I could sit all day trying to get a premonition about lottery tickets, and it would only tell me what color I'd wear the next day. Stupid power doesn't do what I want it to do. He laughed. So will you give me the winning lottery numbers? Please? Chapter 8. Marti was up through the night with Heather as usual, and once they were truly alone and the babies were sleeping, Heather asked how her day with Josh went. Did you guys work things out? Marti shook her head. We're going to be friends, at least for a while. We got me new clothes, and we had so much fun on the snowmobiles. I had to get new boots, because yours were pinching my toes. Heather shrugged. My feet are dainty. So are mine. Yours are micro-dainty. Marti shook her head. We're going sledding tomorrow, and I'm going to make him Tracy's Irish nachos. Oh, yum. Make them for him, and then one day this week, make them for all of us. I can't believe you've been here for 2 weeks and haven't cooked those yet. Do you have any idea how much I craved them while I was pregnant? You could have made them yourself. I could have, Heather said with a grin. I'm not fond of making them. They take a lot of work. But it's worth it if I do it, right? Well. Marti rolled her eyes. I'll do it. Maybe on Monday night. Tell Amy not to cook anything, and I'll make them. You don't deserve it, but I love you. Have you had more visions? Heather asked, bringing the topic back around to where she wanted it. Right smack on Marti and Josh's relationship. I have. I had one where he and I were old, grandchildren around us. And I told him I had no regrets. I guess that means that I came to terms with the triplets and all that, but I don't see how that could happen. Not quickly anyway. Just don't burn your bridges. I can see how he feels about you, and it's pretty obvious you're head over heels for him. If you do something stupid, I'll have to disown you as soon as my babies don't need you anymore. Very smart of you to wait. I can't imagine you having to do the night shifts all alone again, Marti said, shaking her head. I'm nothing if not practical. Marti went back to the laundry and ignored her sister. It was amazing how many loads of laundry 4 adults and 4 babies generated. She needed to get down on her knees and thank her mother for every load of laundry she'd done for her. Laundry was a boring, tedious task that needed to be done constantly. She wished she could just tell everyone to go naked, but she didn't want to think about the messes she'd have to clean up off the floor. Asterisk. When Marti got to Josh's house the next day, he had 2 huge red plastic circles ready for them. What are those? I thought we were sledding. These are my favorite things to sled on. I have some boring sleds that are normal, but these will spin us in circles as we go down. And if I get sick to my stomach? she asked, her eyes wide as she tried to imagine sliding down a hill on one of the contraptions. Then you get sick. We're outside. No big deal. She sighed. I'll give it a try. Can we take the other kind of sled as backup? Sure. If you're that worried about it, we'll take both kinds. Good. Josh went to get another sled that looked more like what she was expecting. It was wooden with metal rails. That's more like it, she exclaimed. If you won't trust someone who has been sledding since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, then I don't know what to tell you. Josh took her hand and pulled her toward his truck. We're going to sled at Amos's. He's got a hill that's more accessible and better. Trust me. We're going to do this right. Amos's? Is he going to come out and start acting all weird again? Josh shook his head. I had Mom invite him to Michael's for lunch so he would be distracted. By the time he gets home, we'll be done. You're a closet genius, aren't you? Don't you forget it. Josh grinned at her as he pulled the truck out onto the highway and headed up the road to Amos's. Heather said you guys usually do big family dinners at least once a month, she said, wondering when the next would be. It hadn't been mentioned since her arrival. Yeah, but we're putting them off until Heather is a little less exhausted from the babies. Probably until about, 1999, we had one the day you got here, but the girls couldn't come, and then we figured it was too much anyway. Marty laughed. So when the babies are 14? I think there'll be more work as teenagers, don't you? That's quite probably true. Can you imagine 4 teenage girls in your house all at once? He shuddered. I can. Remember, I have 6 sisters. Heather, Jessica, Galen, and Rebecca were all teenagers at the same time. Thankfully, I wasn't fighting them all for the bathroom. Why weren't you fighting them for the bathroom? He asked. By the time Heather moved out, I was 9. I was in my no shower unless Mom strips me and throws me into the bathroom and bars the door until my hair is washed stage. He chuckled. I remember going through that stage. Thankfully it was over before I hit high school. Glad to hear it. I don't want to have to think about you coming over with your hair hanging down in greasy sheets. Josh stopped the truck in front of a large ranch house. Marty immediately unbuckled and opened her door. This is Amos's house? Nice. Not as nice as mine, though, right? She laughed. Are you in competition with your brother about everything? Well, yeah. What brothers aren't in competition? I have no idea. But you two do seem to take it to ridiculous extremes. Yup. Josh grinned at her, letting her know he knew how bad they were and he really didn't care. He walked to the back of the truck and took out the 2 discs and the sled. Let's go do this thing. He pointed off in the distance. That's our sledding hill. Okay. Marty was glad she had boots that fit, because it looked like it was a decent length walk just to get to the hill. Then they'd be trudging up and down it dragging sleds. This was going to be more work than snowmobiling. After her first run down the hill in the disc, she grinned at him. Yeah, that was fun. I'm going to try the regular sled once and see which I prefer. Okay, but you should go down head first, on your belly. That's the best way to use a sled. What if I break my neck? Don't. She rolled her eyes and grabbed the rope at the front of the sled, dragging it up the hill. He kept pace beside her with his disc. This is so much more work than snowmobiling. He nodded. Yeah, but it's worth it. It's not safe to go down a hill at that speed on a snowmobile. It could easily flip on you. With the sleds, you just go, and if it does flip, you don't have a heavy machine weighing you down. This is true. When they reached the spot where they started sledding, which wasn't really the top of the hill, but rather a slight indentation where it went flat for a few feet before a sharper incline. She put the sled down and gingerly got onto it. "Race you." And she again took off without waiting for him. He laughed and jumped on the disc, riding it down after her, but knowing he'd never catch up. When she reached the bottom, he crashed into her, knocking her backward into the snow. She laughed helplessly, laying under him sprawled on the ground. "Get off. You're heavy. Are you hurt?" he asked. He wanted to laugh, but he had to make sure she was all right first. "No, not at all." She giggled. "I can't believe you knocked me down. You big oaf." She pushed against his shoulder, trying to get him to roll off her. "I'm not sure I can get up without a forfeit." "A forfeit?" She frowned at him, wrinkling her nose. "What kind of forfeit?" "I was thinking maybe a kiss." "A kiss? But what if my lips fall off? They're frozen, and if there's pressure, they could fall right off into the snow, and I'd run around for the rest of my life, absolutely lipless." He shrugged. "It's a risk you're going to have to take if you don't want to spend the rest of your life in the snow." She laughed and pressed her lips to his cold cheek. "There. A kiss. Now get off me." "It's a good thing it's me who found you two this way, and not your dad, Marty," Amos said from behind them. "You weren't supposed to be home for a while yet," Josh said with a scowl, rolling to his side. "Besides, I accidentally crashed into her and knocked her on her butt." "Accidentally, huh?" Amos reached down and helped Marty to her feet. It was hard to tell if she was blushing or if her face was just red from the cold. "It was an accident," Marty said, taking her hand from Amos's and brushing the snow off the front of her. She stepped away from Amos and looked down at Josh, who was still sprawled in the snow. "We're going to make a couple more runs down your hill," Josh said. "You can lose yourself somewhere. You're on my land. I feel the need to play the charming host." Amos grinned. "I'll go get my sled." Josh groaned loudly. "Great." Marty laughed, watching as Amos walked away. "It won't hurt us to have a chaperone for a little while." "Might be fun." "Might not," Josh mumbled. "Well, I'm going again," Marty said, grabbing the disc. "And as much as I hate to admit it, I think you're right. The discs are more fun." She hurried up the hill, leaving Josh still lying in the snow, watching her. An hour later, they were back in his kitchen, and he was sitting at the table while she meticulously followed Tracy's instructions for making the Irish nachos. She didn't have a deep fryer like Tracy did, so she used a pan and dipped the chips after cutting the potatoes into thin slices. Once everything was finished, she put her masterpiece on the table in front of him. She had put it onto two different plates, knowing it needed to be plated well for full effect. "Let me just pop the scones in the oven, and I'll join you," she said. Josh wasn't about to wait. He'd heard too much about the nachos, and he took a bite of potato chip covered in cheesy sauce and bacon. "These are delicious. You may make them for me every day for the rest of my life." She laughed. "Once a month is more than enough with as much work as involved." "But I like it. You'll live." Marty sat down at the table beside him and took her first bite of the fattening concoction. "I forget how much I love this. I'll never forget it." Josh took another bite. "And I didn't know you were making scones. Are you trying to spoil me? I'm going to have to go back to eating my own cooking." "I've eaten your cooking. You're a good cook, so don't try to make me feel sorry for you." She frowned. "I feel like we should take a plate of nachos to Amos for letting us sled on his hill." "There's no need. And there will be no more nachos by the time I'm done with them. You really aren't good at sharing with your brother." "I don't know what's wrong with you." Not that she really wanted to share her half of the nachos, but she did feel badly. Maybe we should take him a scone. That depends. How many did you make? 6, but I thought you could have some for breakfast in the morning. No scones for Amos then. He doesn't deserve them anyway. Josh ate his last bite of nachos and eyed her plate. I need more. There's stuff for another plate on the stove, she said. Just get up and make them yourself. He took his plate over to the counter and piled it just as high as she had the first time. What do you think of sledding? I think Texas children are deprived of one of the true joys of childhood, and someone needs to bring in snow for them. That might be a really hard thing to do. So, she took another bite of nacho and jumped up when the oven timer dinged. Wait until you try these scones. Tracy's recipe, of course. You said Tracy is married? Yes, why? I'd marry her just for her cooking. But then, I'd miss you a lot. Marti shook her head. You certainly are fickle. Can't decide if you want to marry for love or food. Or love of food. I'm just going to serve the scones and pretend you're not here. You can't ignore me. I will be a thorn in your side if you try. Josh finished his last nacho and sighed, patting his belly. Bring on the scones. You eat more than a teenage boy. Well, yeah. Do you have any idea the number of calories it takes to keep a ranch like this going? I could eat all day and never gain a pound. He reached for the scone she put on the table. Hot. You just saw me take it out of the oven. How can you be surprised it's hot? I don't know, but I wasn't expecting it to be that hot. He broke off a chunk with the side of a fork and blew on it. Raspberry? She nodded. Tracy makes blueberry more than any other flavor, but I like raspberry. We need to try huckleberry. Huckleberry? As in Finn? You've never had huckleberry? It's one of my favorite fruits, but they're so hard to pick. They only grow naturally at high altitudes, and you can pick for hours and only get a quart of berries. They are so worth it, though. Do people sell them? Why have I never seen or heard of these things? Most people don't sell them. I've never seen them in a grocery store. People pick them, and then they use them. No one is willing to go to that kind of trouble just to sell them. Too delicious. He took another bite. When summer comes around, you and I are going huckleberry picking, and you're making me huckleberry scones. It's a date. A date where I get to cook for you? Yay. I can't wait. I hear your sarcasm, but I really don't care. You will be my huckleberry scone slave. Do you hear me? She sighed, taking another bite of her own scone. The man was crazy. Chapter 9. By Friday night, Marti was really looking forward to spending another day with Josh. She knew she shouldn't spend so much time thinking about him if they weren't going to have a future, but she couldn't seem to help herself. That night, Heather sat up with her to talk again after the babies were put back down. What are you guys doing tomorrow? Marti shrugged. I'm not sure. He said something about a fall carnival, but it feels like winter, not fall. Yeah, it does. I wasn't here yet at this time last year, but it seems like it should be Christmas and not Halloween. Are you still playing the Just Friends game? Marti sighed, shrugging. I have no idea. She folded a heavy flannel shirt of Michael's. I feel like I should be careful around him, but I'm not sure what to do. I want so much more than friendship, and I know he does, but how do I guarantee that there will be a future for us? Triplets aren't normal. Heather shrugged. Having quads didn't kill me. Triplets won't kill you. I think you're obsessing for no reason. Give him a chance. But is it too late to give him a chance? And how do I do that? Go up to him and say, "Hey, big boy. I decided that I want to do the relationship thing. You up for it?" Heather laughed. If you do it that way, then I need to see his face. Seriously, I think he'd faint dead away at your feet. Marti grinned. Yeah, that might freak him out just a little bit. She shook her head. Maybe I'll tell him about the vision I had with us and triplets and see what he thinks we should do from there. Or maybe you have a normal relationship and forget what your powers are telling you. If you'd met him 2 years ago, before any of us had powers, you'd have jumped in feet first, with your eyes closed. Why not now? Marti thought about her sister's words long after Heather had gone to bed. Why not? She loved him. There was no doubt about that in her mind. He had feelings for her, whether or not it was love, she didn't know, but he felt something strong. Maybe it was time for her to take the brakes off and see where things would go. She'd been in Idaho for almost 3 weeks, and they'd been dancing around their feelings for most of that time. She made stacks of clothes to be put away when people woke up and settled in with a good romance novel. She had nothing else to do, so she may as well dream about the future she wanted with Josh. Or did she need it? It was a good question, and she may never have the answer. Asterisk. When Josh came by to pick her up the following afternoon, Marti had made up her mind to talk to him. She wasn't sure how she was going to broach the subject, but she needed him to know why she'd been so skittish with him. He took her to a local elementary school, where there was a haunted house and many other fun activities. There was even a small room full of crafts that local people were selling. She wandered around the room, well aware that Josh was bored out of his mind, but he'd chosen to come here for her. By the time they left, she had a bag of gifts for all of her sisters and her mother for Christmas. She'd even chosen a small gift for Amy, knowing she would be part of the Muir family Christmas that year instead of the McClains. After the show, he drove her out of town to a small town about 30 minutes away. I was hungry for steak, and this place does the best steak in this part of Idaho. You game? She nodded. I'm hungry. I didn't even realize how hungry until you pulled up in front of this place. This time the waitress didn't know Josh, and Marti was pleased. It was strange that everywhere they went, he knew everyone. Once she'd chosen her meal and he had laid his menu down, she took a deep breath. It was time to tell him about her vision, and they would talk it through and decide where to go from there. He may feel just as afraid of having triplets as she was. Heather and I had a long talk last night while everyone else slept. We've had a lot of those lately. She bit her lip as she looked down at her hands, almost afraid to meet his eyes. She convinced me that I needed to tell you what has me so frightened about a relationship with you. He frowned. I knew something had happened, but I couldn't figure out what. I thought you'd tell me in your own time. She frowned, finally looking up at him. I had a vision about our future if we married. Wait, what? And it made you afraid to have a relationship with me? Were we fighting? Josh couldn't believe she was just now telling him this. When did you have the vision? The second day we spent together, while I was filling out the birth certificates for the girls' Cabbage Patch Kids. What was the vision? He wasn't sure if he was nervous to hear it or annoyed with her for not telling him sooner. He hadn't been able to figure out what was going on, and being confused was not a pleasant feeling. I saw myself filling out 3 Cabbage Patch Kids' birth certificates, for our triplets. We'd just gotten done talking about how we didn't want to have more than one baby at a time, and then triplets. I just didn't think either of us wanted to deal with that. So you broke up with me over a vision you had about having babies with me? Really? What made you decide to tell me? I've had lots of visions with you and all 3 children. They were all happy visions. I'd see us with the kids. You pushing them on swings. The 2 of us with our grandchildren, and me telling you that there were no regrets. She closed her eyes, embarrassed that she hadn't discussed it all with him in the beginning. I know it's stupid, but I just wasn't sure that's what I wanted. He frowned at her. It is kind of stupid. If you'd met me before these visions of yours, would you have dated me? Or would you have been too scared? I'd have dated you. I have such strong feelings for you, but the idea of triplets, watching Heather with all those babies has me a bit gun-shy. You should have talked to me about it. We could have worked through it. I knew you'd try to talk me into still dating you, and that's why I didn't talk to you, which doesn't make sense at all. I didn't think you should be able to convince me that you were the right choice for me. I thought I should get to decide if I wanted the babies or not. My body, and all that. And now that you're telling me, what am I supposed to do with this information? Move on like it doesn't matter? I don't know. Just like I didn't know what to do with the information that I was having triplets. She felt a tear drift down her cheek. I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you before, but I didn't know what to do. That's my only excuse. Josh felt inexplicably betrayed by her. I can't believe you'd break things off with me over a vision. He sighed. I'm going to have to think about how I feel about it all. I'm not even sure that I want triplets. Take your time. It took me 2 weeks to figure out if I was even going to tell you. You have the right to take as long as you need. He nodded, looking down at the steak in front of him. He refused to let getting upset with her take the pleasure out of eating a good steak. His favorite steak. When Josh dropped Marti off an hour later, she still wasn't sure how he felt. He'd said very little since she'd told him, and instead of walking her to the door, he waited while she got her bag and drove away. Marti let herself into the house and went up to her room. She needed some time to think as well. She hoped she hadn't just ruined her only chance to marry the one man in the world who was perfect for her. Asterisk. Josh spent that evening talking to Daisy about the whole situation, wishing he had someone better to discuss things with. Usually he'd call Amos, but his brother was already getting on his last nerve about the whole situation, and he didn't want to involve him more. He paced the floor, talking and thinking, and Daisy stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Finally, he decided to go out and see his stallion. The horse had become one of his favorite sounding boards. He spent hours in the stable, talking and talking. He realized where she was coming from, but he couldn't decide why she thought he shouldn't be involved in the whole decision-making process. Marti needed to understand that if they were going to be a couple, the two of them would have to discuss important things like whether or not they wanted to go forward with a relationship they knew would result in triplets. And in having grandchildren and talking about having no regrets. That was the part that really got to him. She knew there'd be no regrets, and still she'd waited to talk to him. She should have come to him as soon as she'd known that, but instead, she'd kept it all to herself. She'd probably talked to Heather about it, but Heather couldn't see into his head any better than Marti could. At least he didn't think she could. He couldn't remember what her power was. Finally, after hours and hours of thinking and debating, he made his decision. He would do what felt right to him, and she'd live with his decision. Asterisk. In the time they'd known one another, Josh and Marti had never parted company without making plans for the next time they'd see each other. But she tossed and turned after she finally was able to sleep on Sunday morning, wondering if he was going to make her feel guilty forever, or if he'd come over later that day to spend time with her. She got up at her usual hour and went to the kitchen, nuking some soup for her lunch. It was leftover from the night before, and she had no idea what was in it, but she'd eat it regardless. Hopefully it tasted as good as it smelled. She was halfway through her second bowl of soup when Amy came into the kitchen, getting herself a cup of coffee. Are you and Josh spending the day together? Marti shrugged. I don't think so. We didn't make any plans. She tried to keep the sadness out of her voice when she said it, but she knew she wasn't fooling anyone. Did you two have a fight yesterday? Marti considered pouring her heart out to the older woman, but the decision had been made by all the sisters together that only significant others would know. And she'd told Josh immediately. What did that say about her? Sort of, but not really. That's not much of an answer, but I guess it's your business and not mine. If you need someone to talk to about it all, just let me know. Marti nodded, staring into her soup bowl. She wished she had answers for herself, but she didn't. She knew nothing about what was going to happen next. She wanted to get in her car and drive back to Texas to cry on her daddy's shoulder, but that wasn't going to work. She was just going to have to pull up her big girl panties and deal with life. She spent her day off reading books and hanging out in the living room with the others as the babies were taken care of. It was the first time she'd had nothing to do and nowhere to go when she wasn't working. Heather kept giving her looks, telling her she knew something was up, but not saying anything in front of the others. Marti was glad, because she had only herself to blame for the rift between her and Josh. Finally, she got tired of the sympathetic stares from her sister and mother. I'm going to go take a 3-hour bath with a romance novel. I'll see you when I see you. As she climbed the stairs, she decided to grab her Walkman as well. A night reading and a long bath were just what she needed. She might even paint her toenails and give herself a facial. Soon she'd feel so pampered it wouldn't matter that Josh was completely ignoring her. The bath helped, as did the novel. Before she went downstairs to start the night shift with her sister, she had painted her toenails and fingernails, given herself a facial, shaved her legs, and slathered lotion all over. She felt pampered and good. If Josh didn't want her, so be it. He'd be missing out on her baby soft skin. Heather was the only one in the living room when she got there, and she looked at her sister sleeping so peacefully in her chair before going to the laundry room and starting up the first load of the night. She was making up for all the loads of laundry her mother had done for her while she was at college. There was no doubt about that. When she got back to the living room, Heather was awake. I guess you had a talk with Josh. It didn't go well? Marti shrugged. He wasn't pleased with me, if that's what you mean. He said he had to think about things, and I haven't heard from him since. Who can blame him? I acted like the brat all of you keep calling me and put my own feelings first. I didn't even give him a chance to have an opinion. Things work that way sometimes. Don't worry. If you two are meant to be, and we both know you are, it'll all work out in the end. It just might hurt along the way. Marti nodded. Heather was right. She had messed up royally, but if things were meant to be, it would all work out. She would keep that in mind during the long, lonely days ahead. Chapter 10. Marti dragged all week, worried that she'd ruined her chances with Josh by acting like a silly child. When he called Friday night, she felt marginally better. He asked her to spend Saturday evening with him in his home so they could talk about what she'd told him. He planned to have her over for supper and the talk they desperately needed to have. After she got off the phone, she joined her sister in the living room and smiled and nodded so Heather would know she felt a little better. I'm spending tomorrow evening with Josh. Good, Barbara told her. It's time the two of you straightened out whatever is messed up between you. You think he's good for me? Marti asked, a little surprised. Her mother had always told them she thought they should be older before they married. I do. Normally I'd say wait until you're at least 25 before even thinking about dating a man seriously, but you and Josh are right for each other. I hope he feels the same way when we talk tomorrow. Marti had already decided she was all in. If Josh forgave her, she would move just as quickly as he wanted to move through the relationship. Amy smiled at her. I know he will. I've seen the way he looks at you. Marti just smiled. No one had seen them together since he'd heard why she had made big changes to their lives. Only he knew how he felt. Asterisk. Josh was nervous as he dressed for his dinner date with Marti. He put on brand new jeans, a collared shirt, and his newest cowboy boots. She had never seen him so dressed up. In his pocket was the ring he'd driven to get the Sunday before. There was no way she was getting away from him now. She hurried out of the house as soon as he pulled into his brother's driveway, telling him that she'd been watching for him. Surely that was a good sign. It meant she felt as strongly about him as he did about her. As they drove, he was mostly silent. He greeted her but said nothing else. The drive only took 5 minutes, but he knew she was nervous, and he was, too. She didn't know what he had to say, and he didn't know how she was going to react to the ring in his pocket. He knew what he wanted from life, and she was it. All of her, and nothing less. Was that too much to ask? Once he'd parked in front of his house, they both walked in, and Marti waited nervously. She wasn't sure what to expect. "I made Swiss steak and baked potatoes," he said. "I hope you're hungry." Marti's stomach was tossing and turning, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to eat, but she nodded. She'd choke something down. She deserved to sit nervously until he was ready to tell her his decision. Certainly, he wouldn't have brought her here to dump her. He wasn't that kind of man. He served them both, getting out bottles of Coke for them. Once he was seated, he cleared his throat. "I've thought a lot about what you said." Marti nodded, looking at him. She hadn't taken a single bite of her food, and she couldn't yet. She had to see what he was going to say first. "I'm glad you didn't just stick with your initial anger." "I almost did. I wasn't sure I could get past it. If we go forward in this relationship, I want you to promise me you won't do anything like this again. If there's a vision that affects both of us or anyone we both care about, I want to hear about it right away. No more hiding things from me." "I can agree to that. I really am sorry for the way I handled things. I know it wasn't right." Marti felt a spark of hope when he mentioned going forward. Hopefully he meant it and was ready to keep progressing. "Thank you. We both agree, but it's behind us now. We just need to think about where we want to go from here." She nodded. "I'm willing to let you take the lead on that. If you're ready for me to be part of your future, then I'm ready to stand beside you." He leaned back in his chair and dug into his front jeans pocket, placing a small jewelry box on the table. "That's where I'm ready to go with this." Marti put her hand over her mouth, afraid to touch it in case it would disappear. I don't know what to say." He opened the box for her and took her left hand in his. "Marti McClain, you really are a pain. You make me angry, but you make my heart soar with happiness. Will you spend the rest of your life making me crazy?" She kept her hand over her mouth as she nodded emphatically, and he placed the ring on her finger. "Thank you for forgiving me. I'm not sure if I deserve it, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." He shook his head. "There's nothing to make up anymore. The slate is wiped clean." She sprang out of her chair and onto his lap, kissing him with all the feelings pent up inside her. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." He grinned, pulling her closer. "And I've been wanting you to do it forever. Do you hear me? Forever." She laughed. "When? Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow. Have you lost your mind? My sisters can't get here that quickly, and I'm not marrying without them." He sighed. "Next week then. We'll get married on Saturday at the church where I've gone my whole life." "Can your sisters get here that fast?" Marti nodded. "I'm sure they can. But I won't feel right taking time off for a honeymoon. Heather and Michael need me. How about if we just take the weekend? Someone can cover your night shifts, and then you go back to work Monday night." He shook his head. "I won't like sleeping without my new wife, but we'll make it work." She nodded, a smile filling her face. "I think that's a great idea." Josh grinned. "Of course it is. I came up with it all by myself." She laughed. "You're a mess, but you're my mess, so I guess it's all good." She moved back to her spot at the table beside him, suddenly hungry. "Thanks for cooking for me." You're very welcome. He watched as she started eating, thrilled that she obviously had her appetite back. We'll tell everyone when I take you home tonight. I don't know how I'm going to get a dress fast enough. I wonder if Heather's would fit me well enough. No idea. Give it a try. I don't care if you get married in jeans and those leg sweater things you like to wear. Just so you're standing beside me when the preacher says, "Do you take this woman?" She laughed. I won't wear leg warmers, but I will be beside you. I'll figure a dress out, I hope. I haven't even met your sisters yet. You'll have to invite them all over for supper one night this week so I can meet them before the wedding, and I have a dozen phone calls to make. Are you sure we can't wait a month? He laughed. I'm sure. Now calm down and eat your supper. We'll go tell the family, and all will be well. As they ate, they made plans for their future, both of them talking about things they wanted to do and be together. I really do want to help you with the ranch management when I stop being a full-time nanny. Do you really want my help? She asked. He nodded. I could use some guidance with several different things. I know how to ranch, but sometimes the details of it all get lost on me. If you can help with the financial end, that would be huge. I definitely will. I'm excited to be part of it. Do you think Amos and Michael will really let me help them as well? I know they will. You'll be able to start your own business helping out with ranch management around here. You'd probably have enough work for full-time with just the three of us. Until the triplets come, of course. She groaned. Don't remind me. Would you be averse to waiting a few years to start a family? Not at all. I'm content with nephews and nieces at the moment. He covered her hand with his. No matter what our destiny holds in store, if we face it side by side, I'm sure we can conquer it. She helped him with the dishes after the meal, and they headed back to Michael and Heather's house to share the news with the others. When they walked in, they found everyone in the living room, playing with the babies. They were holding hands, and Heather grinned at Marti. Looks like everything worked out. Marti nodded. It did. In fact, there's going to be a wedding next weekend. We have to iron out all the details, but I was hoping I could wear your wedding dress. Heather squealed, jumping to her feet and startling the baby she was holding. Seriously? I wouldn't joke about something this important to me. Marti hugged her sister, careful of her niece. So? The dress? Absolutely. If it doesn't fit right, I know Mom can fit it to you. Heather frowned. You're not going to give up your nanny duties, are you? Marti laughed. How could I leave you high and dry? I'll be here. Probably not quite as much, but you'll have my help. Michael got to his feet and hugged his brother. I didn't think you two would ever figure it out. Heather and I had positively smooth sailing in comparison. Josh sighed. Sure you did. I'm using your phone, Heather, Marti said. I'll pay you back for the long distance, but I have sisters to call. I hope everyone can make it, Heather said with a frown. I'm not sure Tracy will be willing to leave her pub quite so soon after opening. She'd better, Marti said, hurrying to the phone. An hour later, she stepped back into the room, pleased that Josh was still there. It looks like they're all coming. It will be like a plague of McClains descending on Idaho. Who needs locusts when you can have McClains? Josh asked, pulling her down onto the couch beside him. Now don't make this into some huge wedding. We only have a week, and I don't want to be run ragged. You won't be. I will. Marti grinned at him. Candace promised to pack up my room, and Dad is going to drive a U-Haul up here with everything. He said he'd just rent a regular-sized truck, but he wants a trailer for the Cabbage Patch Kids. Something about not wanting them staring at him creepily as he drives up here. Heather laughed. See? Even Dad hates those things. You people have no taste at all, Marti said, a grin on her face. She didn't care if her whole family hated her dolls. She was marrying the man she loved. After a little bit, Josh got to his feet. I need to get home. I have some serious cleaning to do before a wife can see my bedroom. I'm glad to know my daughter hasn't seen your bedroom yet, Barbara said. Marti blushed. I'll walk you to the door. Josh grinned down at her, his arm around her waist. I'm glad you said yes. There was nothing else I could say. I'm marrying the man I love. What else could I ask for? He stopped walking. You love me? She laughed. Of course, I love you, silly man. I wouldn't marry you otherwise. Triplets. Did you forget about the triplets? I love you, too. I know. You wouldn't put up with me otherwise. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him softly. I'm glad we're getting married. Just so you know. I cannot imagine my forever without you. Figure out the details. I'll be here tomorrow, but I'm not talking just wedding plans. All right. Heather and the two moms will help me. We'll plan it all without you. How would you feel about wearing a top hat? He groaned. Be nice to me. I'll try. Epilogue. 5 years later, Marti was sitting in front of a roaring fire, her hand on her belly. The babies were active and kicking like crazy. Your children need to learn to behave, Josh. He grinned at her, reaching over to cover her hand with his. They're only my children when they misbehave. They're ours or yours the rest of the time. Why is that? It must have something to do with our personalities. I'm always on my best behavior, and you're a man with smelly socks on the bedroom floor. You know I hate laundry, and right now, I'm having a hard time bending over to pick things up from the floor. I'll try to do better, he said, not feeling terribly chastised. In another month, we'll be the proud parents of 3. Have you had more visions about them? She shook her head. Not lately. I know there are 2 boys and 1 girl. I just wish my visions would tell us what to name them. They'd been poring over baby books since they'd married and still hadn't come up with names they both liked. Could we name one of the boys for my father? He asked. William, yeah, we can have a William. Let's name the other for my father. Suddenly it all seemed clear. We'll have a Bill and a Bob. And the girl, how about naming her Bridget? Why Bridget? He understood the other names, but Bridget? Well, then we'll have 3 BS, and I want to name her after my first Cabbage Patch Kid. Her name was Bridget. He shook his head. You seriously want to name our daughter after your first Cabbage Patch Kid? Are you kidding me? Nope. Bob, Bill, and Bridget. Those are perfect triplet names. She sat back with a contented smile. They all stopped kicking. I think they approve. He shook his head. Are you nervous now that we're so close? Not at all, Marti told him. I'm not sure what I was so nervous about anyway. The 3 Bs are going to take the world by storm. No regrets? Josh asked, his voice soft. Never any regrets with you by my side.